a desperate mother, a manipulated husband, and a dark secret that could destroy everything. At the height of a bitter legal battle, Sophia Mitchell is about to unveil evidence that could change everything, but at what cost? With her children at stake and an opponent willing to do anything, time is running out. What would you do when the truth could be your greatest weapon, but also your downfall? Find out before it's too late.
The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Sophia Mitchell stood rigidly at the plaintiff's table, her hands trembling as they clutched the edge of the polished wood. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing the fear that had gripped her ever since the trial began. Beside her, her attorney, Rachel Kane, adjusted her glasses and gave a reassuring nod, but it did little to ease Sophia's anxiety. This was it, the moment that would determine the future of her children and everything she had fought for. Across the room, Jonathan Mitchell sat with his back straight, exuding the same confidence that had once attracted her to him. His sharp suit and polished demeanor contrasted starkly with the man Sophia had come to know in the past few months. Next to him, Vanessa Grant, once her best friend and now the woman carrying Jonathan's child, sat with a hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. Vanessa's expression was one of smug satisfaction, as if she had already won. Sophia's gaze fell to her children, Liam and Emily, who clung to her legs, their tear-streaked faces full of fear. They were too young to fully understand what was happening, but they knew enough to be terrified of the outcome. She could feel their small bodies trembling against her, and it broke her heart that they had to endure this nightmare. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed through the courtroom, and everyone stood as the judge entered. Judge Harris, a stern man with a reputation for fairness, took his seat at the bench and glanced over the room. His gaze briefly met Sophia's, then shifted to Jonathan and Vanessa, who were trying to mask their discomfort under the judge's scrutiny. "The court is now in session," Judge Harris announced, his voice firm. "We are here to determine the custody of the Mitchell children and the division of marital assets. Before we proceed to closing arguments, are there any additional statements?" Rachel leaned over to Sophia, whispering, "This is your moment. You need to make a decision. Do we go all in?" Sophia's throat tightened. She knew what Rachel was referring to. In her hand, she held the file that could destroy Jonathan's carefully constructed facade. The evidence Rachel had gathered of Jonathan's embezzlement and manipulation was damning, but exposing it would mean opening her life to more public scrutiny, risking not only her reputation but also the safety of her children. The thought of what might happen if she failed made her hesitate. But then she looked down at Liam and Emily, their wide eyes full of trust and fear, and knew what she had to do. Sophia nodded to Rachel, who immediately stood up. "Your Honor, my client would like to present additional evidence that is critical to this case." Jonathan's lawyer, a seasoned attorney named Mark Brighton, shot up from his seat. "Your Honor, we object to this last-minute introduction of evidence. This is clearly an attempt to sway the court at the 11th hour." Judge Harris raised a hand to silence the room. "I will allow it, but be brief, Ms. Kane." Rachel handed the file to the court clerk, who passed it to the judge. As Judge Harris began reviewing the documents, the courtroom fell into a tense silence. Jonathan's confident smirk faltered as he watched the judge's expression harden with each page he turned. Finally, the judge looked up, his eyes boring into Jonathan's. "Mr. Mitchell, it appears there are serious allegations of financial misconduct on your part. These documents suggest that you have been embezzling funds from your own company and falsifying legal documents to paint your wife as an unfit mother. Do you have any explanation for this?" The color drained from Jonathan's face, and for the first time, he seemed at a loss for words. Vanessa's grip on his arm tightened, her earlier confidence replaced by visible fear. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, but Sophia remained silent, her heart pounding as she awaited Jonathan's response. The weight of what she had just said in motion pressed down on her, but there was no turning back now. Jonathan finally found his voice. "Your Honor, this is clearly a fabrication. My wife is trying to destroy me because she knows she's losing this case." Judge Harris's gaze remained icy. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Mitchell. I am ordering a recess to thoroughly review this new evidence. We will reconvene in 1 hour. With that, the judge banged his gavel, and the courtroom descended into chaos. Reporters rushed to their phones, and the room filled with frantic whispers. Sophia exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, her body trembling with a mix of relief and fear. Rachel turned to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You did the right thing, Sophia. Now we wait. Sophia nodded, though her mind was already racing with the possible outcomes. As she gathered Liam and Emily into her arms, their small hands gripping her tightly, she prayed she hadn't just made the biggest mistake of her life. The hour ahead would determine everything. The courthouse was a hive of activity as the 1 hour recess dragged on, filled with hurried conversations and anxious glances. Sophia sat in a quiet corner of the waiting area with Liam and Emily, trying to keep her composure. The children were unusually quiet, their usual energy subdued by the tension that permeated the air. Rachel paced nearby, her expression one of intense concentration. She occasionally glanced at her watch, each tick seeming to echo louder in the tense silence. Sophia's own nerves were frayed, and she could barely focus on her children's attempts to distract themselves with a worn-out coloring book. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a familiar voice. Jonathan's lawyer, Mark Brighton, approached Rachel, his face set in a grim line. Miss Kane, may I have a word? Rachel nodded, signaling Sophia to stay put. She walked over to Mark, her expression guarded. They spoke in hushed tones, and though Sophia couldn't make out their words, she saw Mark's face redden in anger and Rachel's look of determination. The brief exchange ended with Mark storming off, clearly furious. Rachel returned to Sophia's side, her face now masked with resolve. We have 1 hour to prepare for the worst. Jonathan's lawyer is going to fight this tooth and nail. But we've got an edge now. We need to make sure our evidence is airtight and our arguments solid. Sophia swallowed hard, nodding. What if he manages to discredit us? What if they say it's all fabricated? Rachel's eyes softened with empathy. We have everything lined up. The documentation, the witnesses, and the expert testimony. Jonathan's not just facing allegations, he's facing a well-documented case. We'll show that this is about his misconduct, not just a personal vendetta. As the minutes ticked by, Sophia found herself glancing nervously at the clock. She remembered the many sleepless nights spent gathering evidence, consulting with experts, and preparing for this moment. The effort had been exhausting but necessary. Now, she could only hope it was enough. Finally, the bailiff's call echoed through the courthouse. All rise. The courtroom, once again, fell silent as Judge Harris took his seat. Sophia stood with Liam and Emily, their little hands clutching her skirt as if they could anchor her in the storm that was about to hit. Jonathan and Vanessa took their places, their expressions a mix of defiance and apprehension. Judge Harris cleared his throat. We will now resume the proceedings. Mr. Mitchell, you have an opportunity to address the court regarding the new evidence presented. Please proceed. Jonathan stood, his face a mask of forced calm. Your Honor, these documents are nothing more than a ploy by my estranged wife to tarnish my reputation and undermine my role as a father. I have always provided for my family and done everything in my power to ensure their well-being. Judge Harris raised an eyebrow. And how do you explain the discrepancies in your financial records and the evidence of falsified documents? Jonathan hesitated, glancing at Vanessa, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. Those records are outdated and taken out of context. I have always acted within the law. Rachel stood and walked to the center of the courtroom. Your Honor, with your permission, we would like to call our first witness to shed light on the discrepancies in Mr. Mitchell's financial practices. Judge Harris nodded, granting permission. Rachel gestured for a middle-aged man in a suit to step forward. He was Charles Davidson, a forensic accountant who had worked extensively on the case. Charles approached the stand and began detailing the findings from his investigation. His calm demeanor and precise explanations painted a clear picture of financial manipulation and deceit. He explained how the discrepancies and falsified documents were not only illegal but intentional, crafted to mislead and defraud. The courtroom listened in hushed silence as Charles detailed the intricate web of deceit Jonathan had woven. Sophia watched Jonathan's expression shift from confident defiance to visible discomfort. Vanessa's earlier smugness was replaced by anxiety as she glanced between Jonathan and the mounting evidence. As Charles concluded his testimony, the courtroom was abuzz with speculation and whispered conversations. Jonathan's lawyer stood and attempted to refute the testimony, but his argument seemed feeble compared to the clear and well-supported evidence. The day's proceedings concluded with Judge Harris ordering another recess to review the testimonies and evidence presented. The gavel came down with a resounding bang, signaling the end of the session for the day. Sophia, exhausted but hopeful, gathered her children and walked out of the courtroom. Rachel followed, her face a mix of triumph and weariness. "You did great today," she said, placing a comforting hand on Sophia's shoulder. Sophia offered a tired smile. "I just hope it's enough." As they left the courthouse, Sophia glanced back at the imposing building. The battle was far from over, but she felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time in weeks, she dared to believe that justice might finally be within reach. The struggle was far from over, but Sophia was ready to face whatever came next, for the sake of her children and her own sense of justice. The courtroom's wooden doors closed with a heavy thud behind Sophia as she walked out, the weight of the day settling on her shoulders. She looked at Rachel and the children, trying to muster a comforting smile despite the exhaustion that gripped her. The finality of the day's events loomed large, and she knew the next steps would be critical. Back at her temporary home, a modest rental apartment she had been staying in since the separation, Sophia sank onto the sofa, her mind racing through the day's events. She needed to refocus, to remember the reasons behind her fight. The apartment was sparse but cozy, filled with the personal touches she and Jonathan had once shared, family photos, art, and a worn-out armchair that held countless memories. Rachel, who had stayed behind to file some documents, entered the apartment later that evening. She brought a stack of folders and a somber expression. "Sophia, there's something we need to discuss. It's about the background of the case. We need to revisit some of the past details to strengthen our position." Sophia nodded, bracing herself. "What do you need?" Rachel opened a folder and spread out several documents and photographs. "We need to explore more about Jonathan's past. There are some things we haven't touched upon yet, and they could be crucial. Specifically, we need to delve into the origins of his financial empire and any previous allegations or controversies." Sophia looked at the photos and documents, her mind flashing back to earlier days with Jonathan. She remembered the initial years of their marriage, the way he had talked about his business, and the gradual shift as he became more secretive. It was during these early years that the cracks had begun to show, but she had been too trusting to see them clearly. Rachel noticed the pained expression on Sophia's face. "I know it's difficult to revisit these memories, but we need to be thorough. There might be connections or patterns that we can use to our advantage. This could help in proving the depth of his deceit and manipulation." Sophia took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. "All right. Let's do this." The two women spent hours going through the documents, unearthing records of Jonathan's early business dealings and personal relationships. They discovered a pattern of dubious financial practices and a history of contentious relationships with former partners. It became clear that Jonathan's rise to wealth was accompanied by a trail of questionable ethics and legal disputes. As Sophia dug deeper, she came across an old news article about Jonathan's previous business ventures. The article detailed a scandal involving fraudulent investment schemes and legal battles that had been quietly settled out of court. The names and dates matched some of the evidence they had already uncovered. It was a damning piece of the puzzle. Rachel glanced at the article and nodded approvingly. "This is significant. It shows a history of unethical behavior that could be used to demonstrate a pattern of deceit." Sophia felt a mix of anger and determination. She was no longer just fighting for her own rights, she was fighting to expose a pattern of behavior that had affected others as well. The personal betrayal was now intertwined with a broader narrative of wrongdoing. The next morning, Sophia and Rachel met with Charles Davidson to review their findings. Charles scrutinized the new evidence, nodding in agreement with their assessment. This information could be very influential in court. It shows a long-standing pattern of manipulation and deceit. Sophia felt a renewed sense of purpose. With each piece of evidence, the case against Jonathan grew stronger. The battle was far from over, but now, they had more ammunition to challenge him. As they prepared for the next day's proceedings, Sophia reflected on the emotional toll this process had taken on her. The strain of reliving painful memories, coupled with the constant stress of the courtroom, had been overwhelming. Yet, she found strength in the support of her children and Rachel. The trial was set to continue, and the coming days promised to be even more challenging. But with the new evidence and a deeper understanding of Jonathan's past, Sophia felt more prepared to confront the next phase of her legal battle. The past was no longer a shadow, it was a beacon guiding her through the storm. And with each step, she was closer to uncovering the truth and securing a future for her children. The courtroom was abuzz as the trial resumed, the atmosphere thick with tension. Today's session was set to address the new evidence Sophia and her legal team had uncovered, and anticipation crackled through the air. Sophia sat in the gallery, her gaze fixed on Jonathan as he entered, flanked by his high-priced lawyers. He wore a carefully neutral expression, but Sophia could sense the underlying unease in his demeanor. She could almost see the cracks forming in his meticulously crafted facade. Rachel, who had been meticulously preparing for this moment, moved to Sophia's side. "We've got to present the evidence carefully today. This is our chance to shift the momentum in our favor." Sophia nodded, her heart racing. The case was about to take a pivotal turn, and the stakes couldn't be higher. The judge called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Rachel took the floor to present the new evidence, starting with the incriminating article about Jonathan's past financial scandals. She detailed the fraudulent schemes and legal disputes, emphasizing the pattern of deceit that had plagued Jonathan's career. Jonathan's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, stood to object. "Your Honor, the past business practices of my client have no bearing on this case. This is an attempt to distract from the real issues at hand." Judge Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Overruled. The evidence will be admitted. However, its relevance will be evaluated in the context of this case." Rachel continued, her voice steady and confident. She presented documents showing inconsistencies in Jonathan's financial statements and revealed testimonies from former business partners who had faced similar issues. The evidence painted a picture of a man who had built his empire on shaky ground and questionable ethics. As Rachel wrapped up her presentation, Jonathan's face grew increasingly strained. Sophia could see him shifting uncomfortably in his seat, his earlier composure slipping away. The facade of the successful, untouchable businessman was beginning to crack. In the afternoon session, Sophia was called to the stand. As she took her seat and faced the courtroom, her nerves were a mix of anxiety and determination. The weight of her testimony was immense, but she knew she needed to convey her side of the story clearly. Charles Davidson guided her through the questioning, focusing on the personal impact of Jonathan's actions. Sophia recounted the betrayal she had felt upon discovering Jonathan's affair and the subsequent struggles she had faced. She spoke about the emotional and financial strain of the divorce and the effect it had on her children. Jonathan's lawyer cross-examined her, trying to cast doubt on her credibility and paint her as an emotional woman seeking vengeance. The questions were sharp and probing, but Sophia answered them with resolve, her composure unshaken. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Jonathan's lawyer pushed for inconsistencies in Sophia's testimony. Sophia held her ground, her answers reflecting the pain and frustration she had endured. The day's proceedings ended with the courtroom in a hushed buzz, as everyone absorbed the significance of the new evidence and the emotional weight of Sophia's testimony. The trial had taken a decisive turn, but the battle was far from over. As Sophia and Rachel walked out of the courtroom, the exhaustion was evident on their faces. "We've made significant progress today," Rachel said, trying to offer a semblance of optimism. "But there's still a lot of work ahead." Sophia nodded, her mind already racing with the next steps. The legal battle was intensifying, and every day brought new challenges. But with the new evidence and the growing pressure on Jonathan, she felt a cautious sense of hope. That evening, as Sophia returned to her apartment, she found herself reflecting on the day's events. The courtroom had been a battleground, and she had fought with every ounce of strength she had. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was determined to see it through. The battle for her children and her future was far from over, but with each passing day, the truth was coming closer to the surface. Sophia knew that the hardest part of the trial was yet to come, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The next day would bring more obstacles and more revelations. But for now, Sophia took solace in the small victories and the knowledge that she was one step closer to uncovering the truth. The following morning brought with it a somber sky and a city in its usual bustle. Sophia's day started early, her thoughts occupied with the ongoing trial. She was preparing for what she knew would be a grueling day in court. Little did she realize that today's developments would shift the trial's dynamics even further. The courtroom was abuzz again as everyone took their seats. Today was critical. Sophia and her legal team were prepared to present more evidence, and the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. Rachel, ever the professional, had been meticulously preparing for this moment, and Sophia could see her confidence mirrored in the attorney's determined face. As the session began, Jonathan's lawyer, Mr. Harrison, made a surprising move. "Your Honor, we have new evidence to present," he announced, producing a file that seemed to contain confidential documents. The judge raised an eyebrow. "New evidence? You should have submitted this beforehand." Harrison replied, "We were only recently made aware of this evidence. It pertains to Sophia's financial status and potential hidden assets." Sophia's heart sank. She glanced at Rachel, who looked equally troubled but quickly masked her concern. "We need to see what they have," Rachel whispered to Sophia. The court clerk handed copies of the new evidence to Sophia and her legal team. As Sophia skimmed through the documents, her eyes widened. The evidence purportedly revealed a series of transactions involving significant amounts of money, transactions that seemed to implicate Sophia in financial misconduct. "This is absurd," Rachel muttered, flipping through the papers. "These are fabricated records." Sophia felt a wave of panic, but she forced herself to stay calm. She knew this was a strategic maneuver by Jonathan's team to destabilize her. Rachel rose to address the court. "Your Honor, this evidence is baseless and lacks authenticity. We have proof that these documents are fabricated. We request a thorough investigation into their origin." Judge Thompson nodded. "Very well. This court will adjourn for the investigation. The session will resume in 2 days." As the court adjourned, the tension in the air was palpable. Sophia and Rachel moved to a private corner of the courtroom to discuss the unexpected turn of events. "We need to counter this aggressively," Rachel said. "Jonathan's team is trying to discredit you. We have to find out who's behind this and prove its falseness." Sophia's mind was racing. "I need to focus on the children. They've been so affected by all this. I have to be strong for them." Rachel agreed. "We'll handle the legal side. You need to take care of yourself and your kids. They need you now more than ever." Later that afternoon, Sophia visited her children, trying to shield them from the complexities of the trial while still offering them comfort. She found them huddled together, their faces etched with concern. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" her youngest asked, his voice trembling. Sophia knelt beside them, her heart aching. "Yes, sweetheart. Everything is going to be all right. We're working hard to make sure of that." Her eldest hugged her tightly. "I'm scared, Mommy. What if they take us away?" Sophia fought back tears, hugging her children close. "We're going to get through this. I promise you." That evening, Sophia and Rachel met with their investigative team, who were tasked with tracking down the source of the fraudulent documents. The investigation was critical, and every detail needed to be scrutinized. Hours passed as they worked late into the night. The tension was high, but determination fueled their efforts. They were relentless in their pursuit of the truth, knowing that uncovering the source of the falsified evidence was crucial to restoring Sophia's credibility. As the night wore on, Rachel received a call from one of their investigators. "We've traced the documents to a known associate of Jonathan's. It looks like this was a coordinated effort to sabotage your case." Rachel relayed the information to Sophia, who felt a mix of relief and renewed determination. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the fight was far from over. Sophia knew that the trial was far from finished, and the upcoming session would be even more critical. She needed to stay strong and focused, both for herself and for her children. The battle was escalating, and she was ready to face the challenges that lay ahead. As Sophia left the office, she looked up at the night sky, her thoughts a swirl of anxiety and hope. The trial was a battleground, and she was prepared to fight for her future and her family with every ounce of strength she had. The trial's temporary adjournment gave Sophia and her team a crucial respite, but it was a brief lull in an ongoing storm. The next few days were filled with intense preparation, strategic meetings, and countless hours of investigation. The weight of the trial pressed heavily on Sophia, but she knew she had to remain steadfast. On the day the court reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. Media coverage had intensified, and the courthouse was packed with reporters and onlookers. Sophia walked through the crowd with Rachel by her side, her face a mask of determination despite the turmoil inside. When they entered the courtroom, Jonathan was already seated at his side of the bench, his demeanor smug and confident. Sophia took her seat, trying to ignore the smirk on his face. She had to focus on the task at hand, disproving the fraudulent evidence and reclaiming her dignity. Judge Thompson entered, and the room fell silent. "We will resume proceedings with a review of the new evidence and subsequent investigation findings," the judge announced. Rachel rose to address the court. "Your Honor, we have thoroughly investigated the documents presented by the opposing counsel. We have determined that these documents were indeed fabricated. The source of these documents has been traced to a known associate of Jonathan Gray." There was a murmur of surprise among the courtroom audience. Sophia felt a flicker of hope but forced herself to remain calm. She glanced at Jonathan, who appeared visibly agitated. "Your Honor, the attempt to discredit Sophia with false evidence is a clear act of desperation," Rachel continued. "We request that the court dismiss this fabricated evidence and proceed with a fair examination of the case." The judge considered Rachel's words carefully. "Very well. The court will disregard the false evidence and focus on the remaining matters at hand." With the false documents out of play, the focus shifted back to the core issues of the trial. The proceedings continued, and both sides presented their arguments with renewed vigor. Sophia's team was resolute, presenting compelling evidence of Jonathan's infidelity and his attempts to undermine her position. As the day progressed, the courtroom drama unfolded with emotional intensity. Witnesses testified, and Sophia's children were called to the stand. The sight of her young children recounting their experiences brought tears to many in the courtroom, including Sophia. Her youngest child spoke with a mix of innocence and fear. "I just want my mommy to be with us and not be sad all the time." Sophia's heart ached, but she kept her composure. She knew her children were a central part of this battle and that their well-being was paramount. During a brief recess, Sophia retreated to a quiet corner of the courthouse. Rachel joined her, bringing a glimmer of optimism. "We've made significant progress today. The fabricated evidence is out, and the focus is now back on Jonathan's actions." Sophia nodded, her resolve strengthened. "I just want this to be over. I want my children to feel safe and for everything to return to normal." Rachel placed a reassuring hand on Sophia's shoulder. "We're getting there. Just hanging a little longer. The truth is on our side." As the day drew to a close, the courtroom buzzed with speculation and analysis of the day's events. Sophia was exhausted but felt a renewed sense of determination. The trial was far from over, but the turning point had been reached. Sophia and Rachel left the courthouse, their steps heavy with the weight of the day's proceedings. They knew the battle was still ongoing, but they had taken a crucial step toward reclaiming Sophia's life and securing a future for her children. That evening, Sophia spent time with her children, trying to provide comfort and reassurance. They were her source of strength, and she was determined to fight for their future. As she tucked them into bed, she looked around their cozy, familiar room and felt a surge of resolve. She would see this trial through, no matter the obstacles. Her family's future depended on it, and she was ready to face whatever came next. The next day, Sophia and Rachel prepared for the final stages of the trial. The groundwork had been laid, and now it was time to bring everything to a decisive conclusion. The fight was nearing its climax, and Sophia knew that every moment counted in the battle for her future and her family. The courtroom was filled with an air of tense anticipation as the final stretch of the trial approached. Sophia and Rachel were deep in strategy discussions, fine-tuning their approach for the upcoming final arguments. They had gathered strong evidence and built a compelling case, but Jonathan's team was still a formidable opponent. Sophia's nerves were frayed, her confidence wavering as the trial drew closer to its conclusion. She was determined to fight for what was rightfully hers and secure her children's future. Rachel, ever the pillar of support, worked tirelessly to keep Sophia focused. "Sophia, we need to make a strong, emotional appeal to the judge. This is not just about legalities anymore, it's about your family and your right to be with your children," Rachel advised, her tone firm but supportive. Sophia nodded, though her anxiety was palpable. "I understand. But what if it's not enough? What if Jonathan's deceitful tactics and his influence sway the judge?" Rachel looked her in the eye, her gaze steady. "We've seen how Jonathan operates. But now, we have a clear advantage with the evidence of his fraudulent actions. We need to show the court the real impact on you and your children." As the trial reconvened, the atmosphere was electric with the build-up to the final arguments. Jonathan's legal team appeared confident, their demeanor suggesting they still had tricks up their sleeves. Sophia, however, was resolute. This was her moment to make a compelling case. Judge Thompson called the court to order. "We are now entering the final phase of the trial. Each side will present their closing arguments. After which, we will deliberate and make a decision." Sophia's heart pounded as she prepared for her closing statement. She took a deep breath and stood before the court, her voice steady but emotionally charged. "Your Honor, this trial is not just about dividing assets. It's about the well-being of my children and my right to be a part of their lives. Jonathan has tried to undermine me at every turn, using deceitful tactics and manipulative strategies. But at the heart of this matter is a family that deserves to stay together." She continued, recounting the emotional toll on her children and the impact of Jonathan's actions on their lives. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke about the fear and uncertainty her children faced. "I ask you to consider not just the legal aspects but the human cost of this trial. My children need their mother, and I need to be there for them." As Sophia concluded, there was a palpable silence in the courtroom. Rachel watched with a mix of pride and anxiety. The emotional appeal had been powerful, but the final decision was still uncertain. Jonathan's attorney took the floor, delivering a polished but cold argument. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client has followed the legal process and has provided ample evidence for the court to consider. The emotional appeals presented here do not alter the facts. We must focus on the law, which supports Jonathan's claims." The contrast between Sophia's heartfelt plea and Jonathan's clinical presentation was stark. As the arguments concluded, Judge Thompson dismissed the court for deliberation. The wait for the verdict was agonizing. Sophia and Rachel retreated to a nearby cafe, trying to distract themselves from the mounting tension. They discussed their strategy for the upcoming deliberation, each trying to remain optimistic despite the uncertainty. As the sun began to set, Sophia received a text from the courthouse. The judge was ready to announce the verdict. Her heart raced as she and Rachel hurried back to the courtroom, the weight of the impending decision hanging heavily over them. In the courtroom, Jonathan was already seated, his expression unreadable. Sophia took her place, trying to steady her breathing. Judge Thompson entered and addressed the court with a grave expression. "We are now ready to deliver the verdict." The room fell silent, the gravity of the moment sinking in. Sophia grasped Rachel's hand, feeling a mix of hope and dread. The judge began to speak, and the final chapter of this intense legal battle was about to unfold. Judge Thompson's voice echoed through the courtroom as he prepared to deliver the verdict. "After careful consideration of all evidence and arguments presented, this court is ready to announce its decision in the matter of Sophia and Jonathan Whitmore." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest, her hands gripping the edges of her seat as if it were her only anchor. Rachel sat beside her, her face a mask of determined calm. Across the room, Jonathan's expression remained impassive, though his fingers drummed nervously on the table. "The court has weighed the evidence regarding the division of assets, custody of the children, and other matters presented," Judge Thompson continued. "It is the judgment of this court that Sophia Whitmore shall retain primary custody of her children, with Jonathan Whitmore granted visitation rights." A collective breath seemed to be held in the courtroom. Sophia's eyes filled with tears of relief as she turned to Rachel, who offered a reassuring smile. Jonathan's face darkened, but he remained silent. "In regard to the marital home," the judge went on, "it will be sold, and the proceeds will be divided equitably between both parties. Additionally, Jonathan Whitmore is required to provide a financial settlement to Sophia Whitmore, acknowledging the contributions she made during the marriage." Sophia exhaled, a mix of exhaustion and relief washing over her. The judgment was a victory, but the emotional toll had been immense. Jonathan stood abruptly, his demeanor shifting from calm to angry, before storming out of the courtroom without another word. Rachel turned to Sophia, her expression filled with pride and concern. "You did it." The court recognized the truth. Sophia nodded, though her mind was already racing with the next steps. "Thank you for everything, Rachel. I couldn't have done this without you." As Sophia and Rachel exited the courtroom, they were met with a crowd of reporters and photographers eager for statements. Sophia, still in shock, managed to address the media with a composed but heartfelt message about the importance of family and justice. Later that evening, Sophia returned home, the place that had been a battleground now standing as a symbol of her resilience. Her children rushed to greet her, their faces lighting up with joy. The sight of their beaming smiles was a powerful reminder of what she had fought for. As they settled into the living room, Sophia reflected on the ordeal. The victory in court was bittersweet, a reminder of the emotional scars and the struggle she had endured. But it was also a testament to her strength and the support she had received from those around her. Just as Sophia began to feel a sense of normalcy returning, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from an unknown number, a text that read, "There's more to Jonathan's story than you know. Meet me tomorrow at the old pier. A friend." Sophia stared at the message, a chill running down her spine. The sense of closure she had been seeking seemed elusive. The promise of more revelations and potential complications loomed, casting a shadow over her hard-won victory. Rachel, noticing Sophia's distress, inquired, "What's wrong?" Sophia showed her the message, her expression troubled. "I don't know who this is, but it looks like there might be more to this story." Rachel's eyes widened with concern. "Are you going to go?" Sophia hesitated but then nodded. "I need to know what this is about. I can't afford any more surprises." As night fell, Sophia prepared for the meeting, her mind filled with questions and apprehension. The final chapter of this tumultuous journey was far from over, and the promise of new revelations set the stage for what was to come.